Members of Council, ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises me that it is now 7 o'clock, so I will call this Council meeting to order. And I would ask you please to stand and join with me in a moment of silent reflection, our national anthem, O Canada. Madam Clerk, are there any agenda announcements and/or amendments? Being none, disclosure by any member of Council this evening? No disclosures. Thank you. Consent items. I have a resolution moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that consent items numbers 1 to 9 be approved. Are there any one of those that any member of Council wishes pulled out and dealt with separately? Councillor Best, Councillor Ali, and Councillor Tesser-Dirksen, and Councillor Melbu. So if you could just Councillor Best and Councillor Cluett. Sorry about that. So let's start. Councillor Best, which one?
Item 7.
7. Councillor Ali?
Item 5.
5. Councillor Cluett?
Item number 7.
7, okay. And Councillor Tesser-Dirksen?
Number 8.
8. Last but certainly not least, Councillor Melbu.
That should come as no surprise, number 6.
6. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to deal with them in order. So, Councillor Ali, number 5.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just really happy to see come up, and I would like my councillor colleagues' support on this. This is an issue that has been coming up into our ward again and again, and Councillor Hamid will attest to that. We've both been getting a lot of emails about this. I had the opportunity to go scope out the area with Trustee Garrett and Principal Robertson, and let me just say it was a hair-raising experience. It was just terrible to stand there and be able to do nothing about it. So I would also like to thank staff who really made this a priority item, went out, scoped the area, assessed it, and warrants. I'm really glad the warrants were met, and then we're putting this all-way stop there. Thank you.
And I thank you for that. Is there any further on 5? Okay, Councillor Melbu, number 6.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you will recall, we have spent tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayer dollars to acquire a system that was to provide us with precise and timely ridership data. Yet here we are in the first week of the 4th quarter, and we are just receiving the ridership numbers of the 2nd quarter. Tonight we should be looking at the 3rd quarter numbers, not the 2nd. People in the tech business tell me that with today's technology, those numbers should be readily available at the push of a button. But for some reason, it's taken us 3 months to get them. That, Mr. Mayor, raises a red flag for me. You know, what are we doing with the numbers that requires this length of time to provide this information? Also, Before we purchased this new up-to-date system, we used to get far more detailed reports. We used to get riderships broken down to show peak and off-peak hours. We used to get Saturday and evening ridership numbers, which we are not getting. Here we spent all this money to get more accurate and detailed data, but for some reason, council is not provided with that data. Now, to the report itself, this report takes great pains to highlight the 8% increase in ridership over the second quarter of last year, but glosses over the increase in cost to the taxpayers for that same period. In the second quarter of 2018, we spent $1.5 million to provide the service. In 2019, that cost increased to $1.7 million, $200,000 more for a 12% increase. So we increased the cost to the taxpayers by 12% to generate an 8% increase in ridership. In 2018, the taxpayer subsidy per ride was $6.25 a ride. In 2019, that increased to $6.65. So as the numbers of rides goes up, the cost to the taxpayers per ride increases. That doesn't make sense. The opposite should be happening. Also, if we look further into these numbers, we find that we spent $200,000 more of taxpayers' money in this second quarter compared to last year to add fewer than 100 new transit users to the system. So for every new user of transit implied in this second quarter, they cost Milton taxpayers more than $2,000 each. Mr. Mayor, as we approach budget time, I would ask not only members of this council, but as staff as well, to take a serious look on how we provide transit in this town, considering the increased burden it is putting on our taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Cripps. And again, heard Councillor Malbouth's observations. So it might be a double-edged response, partially from you and maybe partially from IT there with regards to reporting and, you know, the timing of that. So maybe we'll deal with that, Mr. Cripps.
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to the format of the report, we brought forward a report, I believe it was back in 2017, which detailed how we were going to change the process of reporting and to provide a dashboard format of report, and that was approved by Council. So we are reporting in accordance with Council's wishes. Increase in cost, yes, the costs have gone up. There's been a net service increase in hours, even though we did a reduction in service levels by moving the end of the service back to 10 p.m. There still is a net increase in service hours over the Q2 last year. In regards to the timing of the report, I do apologize for that. We were involved with our master transit plan, getting that finalized. We had issues with Metrolinx and having to change our service delivery to meet their revised train schedule. So there were other things, but I can assure you that our Q3 report is scheduled to come next month, on a more timely measure.
Okay, I think that takes care of both of those observations and questions. Councillor Malbouth, any further to add on number 6? Any other member, any on 6? Councillor Challoner?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. That was the last council that made that decision with respect to reporting. And I guess my question is, based on the answer, is it a great deal to provide in future the data that Councillor Malbouth is looking for, or is it an IT issue?
Mr. Cripps?
These reports, the numbers are generated by transit staff, so it's not really IT's issue. We can, if council so wishes, we could bring back the old format. It's a lot more work for staff to prepare and tabularize the detailed information. If that was the wish of council, I would perhaps suggest that we do that detail of a report maybe once a year, and then provide this dashboard format for the balance of the 3 quarters.
Councillor Challoner?
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to know what Councillor Malbouth thinks about this, but from my perspective, I guess I'd kind of like to know how much extra work is involved before I ask the question. But certainly, I wouldn't mind seeing the additional information as well, and perhaps more than once a year.
I'm just wondering aloud now if it might be wise, and again, I have no opposition on information, but I'm just wondering if Council might want to think at the next meeting as to what they may wish and possibly give staff an opportunity to see just what extra time there might be needed for that, or maybe Mr. Cripps or Mr. McHarg, either one of you might have a rough idea right at this moment. So, Mr. Cripps or Mr. McHarg?
Your Worship, I would like to take a chance to go back and talk to transit staff, see what would be involved.
Okay, I'm going to assume that that's going to be okay with the majority of council on pursuing it. That's certainly what I would urge us to think about. So, Councillor Chandler, any further?
That's fine, Your Worship.
Any further on 6? If not, Councillor Best, number 7.
Yes, just want to thank staff for the update on what Metrolinx is doing or not doing. I want to request through staff, I understand that they are working with Metrolinx in terms of the plans for the Milton GO Station expansion, which is now reaching its 2nd anniversary on November 15th from the announcement. Could we have a presentation to Council similar to what the police are doing tonight on what the final plan is for the expansion, because it seems like the builders in the area know more than what Council and the public do. So I'd appreciate staff getting back when the report is done.
Thank you. I would only assume, Mr. Acting CEO, that could certainly be accommodated to you.
I have a meeting with Metrolinx coming up. I believe it's next Friday, so I'll make an appeal to them directly to have a presentation to this council about that project specifically.
Councillor Best?
It's fine, but just looking for the final plan. I understand there's still some negotiations going on.
Councillor Clue, on same item.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had the same inquiry as to the status of the expansion. It's something that I know that many people are looking for, and it's hard for us to try to answer with the response of "I don't really know." It doesn't really help a lot. So I'm glad that you'll be having a meeting. And I know it outlines some information in this report about the GO Bus number 20 decertification or the discontinuation of it. I was just wondering, hopefully at that meeting you can also press them and on that matter and see if we can get some kind of resolution. I've received a number of phone calls from students who are now having to get into their cars to drive down to Sheridan College. I know it's only a small amount of numbers, but we're trying to eliminate people from getting in their cars and driving. If we want to have public transit, I know that the province is talking about affordability, but we're talking about practicability here in the town of Milton. So if you can pass that along, that would be great.
Mr. CEO, on that.
We were asked to give an agenda of items that we were interested in speaking in, and that sort of north-south movement was one of the items that we've added to it. So,
Councillor Clue, any further? Any other member of council any further on number 7? Moving to item number 8, Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few questions, and I don't expect too specific a response. Something very high level from staff would be fine, but just going through the comments provided on the different discussion points. Firstly, I noticed in the, I'm looking at page 2 of the report, about halfway down, where we're talking about the proposal of the changes in the provincial policy statement to reduce barriers and costs for development. Whose costs are we looking at reducing, and is there a correlating increase in cost to someone else?
And again, I'm not sure who's going to respond to that, but Mr. CEO, who? Ms. Koopmans?
Through you, Your Worship, essentially there's an interest in cost-effective development. It remains to be seen how those costs will be allocated, particularly with the additional emphasis on market housing as well. So there are a lot of details, and these are some of the questions that staff submitted through the HAP group to the province.
I have a feeling most of my questions are going to be the same as what you asked. The next one is with respect to defining what market-based input would entail, so I won't bother asking that. I do want to note on page 5 of the report, so this is item number 4, supporting rural, northern, and Indigenous communities. there might be some interpretive freedom when we're defining a rural community. Would that part of the policy statement bring any of our area into the rural definition, or are we talking very remote communities in Northern Ontario?
Through you, Your Worship, a number of the rural policies would apply to part of our community. However, because of the way the policy structure works, in a lot of our rural area, we also have the Greenbelt Plan and the Niagara Escarpment Plan, and those plans being more specific would take precedence over the more general policies of the provincial policy statement.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Councillor Best and I have very large rural areas. I'm thinking particularly the residents up in Milton Heights who've been concerned for quite a few years about how they're going to be considered within planning policies. And I think that's it. That's good for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member of council, anything on item number 8? I rather suspect on the last and a small editorial on my part, I rather suspect from what I can gather that we'll probably have a pretty good understanding of that sometimes in early November, so that's not all that far away as to what directions we might be heading in, so a bit of an editorial on my part. Okay, there are no changes to any one of those. You heard the resolution that I read out earlier on. Any further discussion on any of them? If not, those in favor of the motion, and that's carried. Now, just before I vacate the chair here and hand it over to Councillor Challoner, who's going to be chairing the committee, before I adjourn this council meeting, I want to recognize one of my colleagues here this evening that's celebrating a very special day, and it happens to be Councillor Rick DiLorenzo's birthday today. So, or Councillor Maplehurst, was it? I got the wrong Rick then, yeah. So, Councillor Maplehurst, happy birthday, and I'm not going to suggest we sing because I know I'm terrible at it, and I suspect and know that the majority of you are as well, so. Councillor Lee?
We can sing. Christina and I can sing.
Mr. Mayor, I don't recall you being afraid to sing happy birthday just a short week or two ago to me.
I know we're live tonight. We're being televised, so I don't want to scare the listening audience out there too awful much on it. But Councillor Maplehurst, happy birthday.
I didn't know it would cause so much controversy.
Anyway, happy birthday. Madam Clerk, have we forgotten anything? Members of council, ladies and gentlemen, this council meeting is now adjourned. So, Councillor Challoner, if you would assume the chair. This meeting now adjourned.
Everybody. Are you one? Are you two?
Evening. Anyone who would like to be informed when the final report will be going to council, or anyone who wishes to speak but is not a registered delegate, please fill out the register located just inside the council chamber doors. This is a public meeting under the Planning Act for staff report PD 037-19. The subject is a public meeting and initial report, proposed local official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment by Radhasoami Society Bayes Canada and 254-2534 Ontario Inc. for lands known municipally as 6566 6th Line in Milton. If there is anyone other than a representative of the applicant in the audience who would like to speak on this matter, please raise your hand. You will be given an opportunity to speak. Registered delegates will be given an opportunity to speak first. And as far as I know, I don't have any registered speakers. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to staff to present the information.
Good evening. The applicant is here this evening to answer any specific questions that council may have. Essentially, council will recall that this use was recognized by the Ontario Municipal Board as a temporary use quite some time ago and has undergone a series of extensions of that temporary use bylaw. This proposal is now an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to permanently allow the existing use, which is a place of worship and study center, to operate on a limited scale. And this is in accordance with the minutes of settlement that council executed based on an appeal of OPA 31. I'd be pleased to answer any questions, as well as Jill Hogan, and as I said, the applicant is here this evening.
All right. Does the applicant wish to come forward and speak to the application? No? Is there anybody in the audience who wishes to address council on this matter? For a second time? For a third time? All right. Let it be noted that there's no one wishing to speak. I will now read out the staff recommendation. Be it resolved that Planning and Department Report PD 037-19 be received for information, and that upon completion of the review and evaluation of the application, a technical report will be brought forward by the Planning and Development Department for consideration. This has been moved by Councillor Best and seconded by Councillor Ali. Now, it's now the opportunity for council to ask questions of staff. Does anybody have any questions of staff with respect to this application? Councillor Cluett.
Just some comments, Mr. Chair. Just not to belabor the point, I just know that this has been a long process throughout the last number of years, and we've been working with the proponents, with staff for, again, it was a number of years, and I'm glad to see that we're finally reaching the end of this. This is going to be a great addition, I think, to the area, especially with the fact that with the plans that they have for the property, the fact that they're going to be keeping the natural areas as green as possible, and working with our community and working with our staff, as well as, I think, just a good thing from an overall standpoint of our growing diverse community as well. So I just want to commend staff and the proponents for doing a great job in getting this working, and look forward to seeing this finished product.
Thanks, Councillor. Any other questions or comments from council with respect to this matter? Seeing none, I'll now call the vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hands. It's passed unanimously. Thank you. So I guess I'll now declare the meeting closed, the public meeting, that is. All right, we have a presentation now from Chief Tanner, and I would ask the Chief to come forward and make his presentation.
Well, thank you very much, and it's always a privilege to come to Milton and to Milton Council, and of course I see some of you more than others at Regional Council as well. And a few years ago, I came back, for the new members of council, I came back home to Halton 7 years ago. I had started here and traveled around the province in different police services in Guelph and Belleville and Kingston, and was fortunate enough to come back here 7 years ago. And one of the things that we undertook to do was to come to at least each of our municipal councils, all four, at least once a year, or whenever you would like us to be here. So there is no formal presentation tonight, and I'll explain why. And I think it's a good reason, so bear with me. But I have Superintendent Al Albano and Inspector Julie Craddock here with me tonight, and they are part of our senior management team, and they are for most intents and purposes, the chief and deputy chief of Milton and Halton Hills. So they are certainly here and run the day-to-day operations. The men and women that you see in the marked cars and our detectives in the north end of Halton, they are their command staff. They did a presentation with council earlier on this year, so I would anticipate that we will do a similar event with you again first quarter-ish of next year. As soon as we have our final statistics from this year, then we can do year-to-year comparisons and present to you on what happened throughout 2019. My intent tonight, after Al and Julie and I had talked about the fact that that had already taken place, is really to use tonight as much more of an informal, high-level overview of some of the things that are going on in the region and in Milton, and there is a little bit of growth that some of you have noticed around this table, so that certainly causes some pressures and some good pressures in many ways for us. So that's my intent tonight, is just to talk about some of the recent happenings, some of the things that have used our resources on a regional level, because many, many years ago, and some of us will remember, when there was a Milton Police Service and Oakville and Burlington were separate. And there are definitely some economies of scale when we come together as a larger regional police service, where we can have the specialized units of highly trained staff, such as homicide, sexual assault, computer crime, internet, child pornography, luring, all sorts of things that we are now in the business of enforcing, where if we were all on our own, we would really have a hard time and struggle to do that. So when the worst things happen in Milton, the shooting not too many months ago, some of the serious situations here, it is not just the men and women who are assigned to Milton who come here to look after those things, it's all of the special units. So, and I think there's two really good examples of that in our domestic violence unit and our child and sexual assault unit. So many, many years ago, when I started in 1982, we would do domestic violence cases and investigations usually as uniformed patrol officers on the road, sometimes with limited experience. And in Halton, for many years now, there has been a full-time domestic violence unit, which is approximately 28 officers, detectives, who do nothing but domestic violence cases, interventions, and follow-ups. So when our officers, for example, in Milton, are sent to a domestic violence situation, they will intervene and do what is necessary at the scene. But ultimately, that investigation, going to court, preparing victims and witnesses, is done by domestic violence investigators. And on the child and sexual assault side of things, that has also become so specialized, as it should, because not everyone could possibly have the level of training to understand and investigate sexual assaults in some of the worst situations that we encounter. So again, those are turned over to full-time detectives who are available regionally, work out of either headquarters or our Oakville station, because we have a lot more room there. We'll talk about the Milton station, where there is no room, and definitely need for changes. So those are some of the things that are available region-wide on the specialized side. You can go on to speak about our tactical rescue unit for, high priority interventions, armed and barricaded persons, hostage-taking type of situations. They are regional resources, as are Marine units and K-9. So K-9 is not assigned to Milton, but they are available to Milton anytime, and those are some of the higher level resources that come through either headquarters or, again, assigned elsewhere here. Now, we are, for those that aren't on Regional Council, we are just over 1,000 people who work for the Halton Regional Police Service now. About 730 or so of those are uniform or sworn officers, not all in uniform. So about half of them are in uniform, and about half are in special investigative types of units. And then they are supported by some 300 plus civilian employees, which go anywhere from our communications 911 center. And if you ever have a chance to come down to headquarters, that is one of the areas that I would suggest you see the type of technology that has been invested in that center now, so that we can do real-time dispatch and see not only where our vehicles are, but now where our police officers actually are physically. So if there is ever a worst-case scenario type of situation, we can track those people down by GPS, which is actually signaling from portable radios. That technology, if you get a chance to come down, and the mapping systems is really quite unique. And I was just speaking with, I think it was a radio reporter here in Milton today about dispatch, because some people don't know that the Halton Regional Police, in our case, is the PSAP, or the primary answering point. So every 911 call comes to the Halton Regional Police Headquarters Dispatch and 911 Center. And then if it is, and that's where they'll say police, ambulance, or fire, depending on the conversation that then takes place, we send the calls off to the appropriate agency. Although we can stay on those calls, because sometimes it requires a multi-tier type of response. It may be an ambulance call, which is also an assault, for example. So if you ever have a chance or would like a tour of headquarters, please get in touch with either myself or our staff at headquarters, and we will certainly arrange that. We are looking at some fairly substantial budget pressures. I think many of us have noticed that the provincial government probably has some budget issues, and as they try to have a look around at where there can be savings, often that means decreases either to a municipality or, in our case, to policing. We do receive over $2 million per year. We're hoping it's about $3 million, but I say 2 right now for a reason, because we've received $1.9 million in grant funding for this year and guaranteed for the next 2 years, but that should be about $2.6 million. And what the province did when they brought in the new Police Services Act was sort of change the rules around what was known as the PEM grants in the policing world, where they had previously paid for 1,000 new officers and then another 1,000 new officers across Ontario. That added up to about $2.6 million, but with the new Police Act and the emphasis on community safety and well-being, they have said, here is the 1.9, which is attributed to this part of what you do. Now we have submitted applications towards the 600, which will be based on more community safety and well-being, and there's a third part which is dedicated for human trafficking and gun and gang violence, which we all know that we need. Not, thankfully, as much in Halton as some other places, but it is definitely here as well. So that is when you have those sorts of potential funding shortfalls, adds additional pressure. And there is one other pressure which is unique geographically to Milton, and for us that is the Maplehurst Correctional Facility. We have hundreds and hundreds of calls for police service at Maplehurst every year. If you can imagine, 1,800 or so inmates between Maplehurst and Vanier. And for the last number of years, we have had 3 police officers assigned to Maplehurst, so they work full-time at Maplehurst, although they're assigned to the detective office, which reports to Al and Julie. They've been funded at $400,000, and just last week, and I was mentioning this to the media after the Police Services Board, the Ministry of Correctional Services decided to cut that $400,000 and say that that program finishes as of December 31st this year. That puts us in a $400,000 deficit in some ways, but ironically leaves us with just as much of a workload. We have, and I think it's just over 500 assaults per year inside Maplehurst. So if you look at our crime statistics for the region of Halton, 1/3 of our assaults occur inside Maplehurst, which affect in a negative way our crime stats, although our crime stats are very good. But it causes this additional workload that if we are not inside Maplehurst and funded by the Ministry of Corrections as we should be, will ultimately cost the citizens of Halton more money, because not only will we be doing the same workload, but we'll be using officer time to respond to Maplehurst every time we need to be there. I mentioned fentanyl, and certainly mental health is a huge and quickly expanding workload for us, as is fentanyl. Fentanyl definitely is a devastating trend which has swept across Canada now, and often happens inside Maplehurst as well. We had 2 inmate deaths within the last week or so, which require investigative services from homicide and our drug investigators and others. So it's not just the 3 people that they're threatening or saying they're taking the funding away for, we probably spend over $1 million a year on investigating things in Maplehurst, which should not be at the expense of Halton taxpayers. It's a provincial facility funded by the province, and that should be at least subsidized. So we continue to have some very good dialogue with Minister Jones, who is now our Minister of the Solicitor General, and others. I'm hopeful it might change, but I have no good news yet. So stand by for some of those things. We talked a little bit about mental health increasing. I think we all know that. It's a sign of the times in some ways, sadly. It may be, I have my own theories on people not talking to people as much as we used to, and everyone's on Twitter, and families in restaurants talking to other people because they're not talking to each other, but it's a lot more complicated than that. But we also have the mental health issues that we're dealing with our own staff. And when the province just about 2.5 years ago made post-traumatic stress disorder presumptive legislation in Ontario, it means that if anyone does have PTSD and they are a police officer, it's assumed that it is caused by work, which trickles down to WSIB issues and absences. We have people who definitely are suffering from PTSD because of some of the things that they have seen and done during their careers, and that results in absences from the workplace, but not at a reduced cost. So you will see us coming to Regional Council probably by the end of this year, after our budget goes through the Police Services Board budget process, with a slightly higher budget than what is the Region of Halton guideline for this year. And we'll certainly have the background information for the members of Regional Council that will make that decision. So we continue to be very busy in Milton. As I said, growth is tremendous here, as is traffic. There may be a question about that at some point. I don't think Mr. Malbuff ever asked me about traffic, but maybe tonight. And it's his birthday, so I may answer as well. But yeah, it's traffic definitely is interesting. Growth is good, and it does come with traffic and some different complexities. And the reporter asked me today, do I expect crime to increase because the population in Milton is increasing? Yes, I do, but probably proportionally with the population. So our crime statistics, and we talk about our crime rates, are very low compared to any comparable municipality or even across Canada. Our crime severity index, and I know we talked with the Regional Council about that, but what Statistics Canada did quite a few years ago now was come up with a measure which weighted crime by the seriousness of the crimes. And what they actually did, and long story short, is they took every crime in the criminal code and they looked at what the average sentence for that crime was across Canada, and they weighted them. So that if you have 2 municipalities beside each other and one has 100 spray paint types of situations and 1 homicide, and the place next door has 50 willful damage but 15 homicides, that's a lot more serious, basically, is what the crime severity index attempts to do. The good news on that is we are the lowest large municipality across Canada of 100,000 or more when it comes to the crime severity index. And I think of over 400, there are only about 15 very small municipalities that have a lower crime severity index. They tend to be small towns, less than 15,000 generally. So all that to say, on the crime severity index, as much as we had 3 tragic homicides about 6 weeks ago now, we don't have very many. Often we average 1. So this was a terrible month or 2 months for us. All will be solved. But on the solvency side of our crime statistics and of our crime severity index, one of the things that we in our senior leadership team are all most proud of is we have the highest clearance rate for that crime severity index, which means, yes, we have less happening, but on a percentage type of basis, our investigators and our frontline officers are clearing more of those crimes. Sometimes that's charges where people go to court. Other times we know who's responsible. There may be a reason why not to go to court, and it gets resolved a different way, but the perpetrator is identified and that crime is cleared. That is around 51% so far this year, and that is exceptionally high. And if you can imagine, when we have our, if we call them persons types of crimes, where it's one person perpetrating a crime against another person, there usually is a witness. And that witness can usually help to identify in one way or another the person who committed the assault. At least there is a witness to it. By far, more of our crimes are property crimes, break-and-enters, thefts, theft from autos in the middle of the night. And so those are much harder to solve because there are no witnesses. Increasingly, video is helping us, and it's helped us recently and will help us in the next couple of weeks solve a very, very serious crime, because there is a lot of video in our business partners in the downtown areas, residential videos, which helped us solve a very large break-and-enter group that were actually illegal aliens here from Chile just about 2 years ago now, I think it was. There were 15 of them, and some home video actually helped us identify some of those people and return millions of dollars worth of property back to victims. So those are sort of the crime trends we're working on. Traffic is always important to us, and it's probably the #1 thing that has come back to us again through our business planning process we're doing with the Police Services Board right now, from citizens and groups that we've got together with. I think last year, we were just looking at some figures today, because we do not benefit financially from provincial offense notices, but I believe we gave out just over 49,000 provincial offense tickets last year. Most of those would be Highway Traffic Act. Some would be Liquor License Act, Trespass to Property Act, but there is a large amount of revenue which is generated from those provincial offense notices. Some of it is taken off the top by the administrative part of our court system, and then some flows back to the region and to the municipalities. Quite a few, the number escapes me from our budget meeting today, but quite a few red light offenses now, and some of those are here. I encourage red light cameras. I think they're great. And I also say publicly, if there's a time for photo radar and municipalities are allowed to do photo radar, by all means, I'd be fully supportive of that. I think when it was in place, and it must have been the early 90s maybe, when it was in place, it slowed people down. It slowed me down. And I think that thought of more red light cameras, more photo radar, more technology and traffic enforcement, so we're not tying up the human resource side of policing as much. We will always do that. The red light cameras don't have to go to court the way police officers do, which is another additional expense, and sometimes pressure on their time on days off and things as well. So I would certainly encourage any increased commitment or investment in the technology when it comes to those types of photo types of HTA, Highway Traffic Act enforcement. I would encourage fully. So I'm certainly here to answer any questions. I saw a couple hands pop up as I was speaking, so.
Thanks, Chief. I do have a speakers list, and with one exception, they're all regional councillors. What does that tell you? Anyway, we'll start with Councillor Maplehurst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome back, Chief, again. Yeah, thank you. You may not say it after. So, okay. No, I appreciate you coming up, and you did touch on some of the issues I've got. But and I suspect most members of this council have seen a major increase in the number of calls and complaints surrounding the speeding, aggressive driving, the loud vehicles driving up and down our streets. I know that some of that has to do with our growth, and it seems we're experiencing more traffic accidents due to that aggressive driving. So my question is, what plans does the Halton Regional Police Service have to increase enforcement and to provide greater police presence in Milton? Basically, my question is, are there any plans to get more boots on the ground?
Yes, and certainly that'll be part of what goes to Regional Council. We are, I will say that our staff, we pull our more senior management staff of the Halton Regional Police when we're building up our budget each year. We typically, within the 3.5% budget guidelines, which have been the guidelines for the region for the past 3 to 4 years, we are typically only able to hire 12 to 14 additional police officers, because a lot of that increase is taken up primarily by salary increases through collective bargaining, increased benefit costs, sometimes the cost of gasoline, the capital costs of buildings. So when we have, our budget is right now about $155 million. So when we look at 3.5 being, let's say, even rounded off to 5% or $5 million, there is about 1.5 million left out of that 5 million to hire additional police officers each year. So some of those pressures will lead us to come to the board and to Regional Council with a higher number this year, and we will see where that goes. But we do have, we just hired, we don't hire very many experienced officers, but from time to time we do. We just hired 6 from different police services across the country. And 4 of them, I was just talking with Al and Julie, 4 of them will be coming to Milton probably next week or the week after. And we have recruits at Aylmer right now, and some of those will be coming here. If we were to hire 15 new officers next year, I know at least 5 or 6 are coming to Milton. Beyond that, the numbers are a little bit unknown until we get the budget done. So definitely we are looking to expand. And we also have the pressure of the buildings, where we are hoping to have a land acquisition complete and move towards a larger building. In the meantime, we are going to have to make do with the building we're in right now in Milton, which we were probably outgrew a year or 2 after it was built. It was around the time I probably left for Guelph in around 1998 or so. So it's long overdue that we need a bigger facility here to house more people as well.
Okay, thank you. Just my concern, Chief, is, in my opinion, I don't believe that the police services, the level of police service in Milton has increased at the same rate as our population. We've increased by 400% in the last 15 years. I do not believe the police services is anywhere near that. So that's the concern I have with that. Okay, but I'm glad you're saying you're going to address it, and let's see what happens with if we do get more boots on the ground, more officers out in the streets, because that's the biggest concern. The other thing, and I did have a question, was there anything the municipality could do to assist the police in dealing with this issue? You did touch on the photo radar, which I've asked staff to take a look at, and is that process through the region, or is it totally a municipal decision?
No, I believe that's totally a municipal decision, and within the power of the municipalities to do photo radar and as they do red light cameras. The other thing I would just, if I could comment on numbers, there are a lot of, as I alluded to, the domestic violence unit of 28 and the sexual assault unit, which is large at headquarters, and the dedicated homicide and cybercrime. If I look at Burlington as an example, when I started in 1982, we had somewhere around 19 or 20 constables on a platoon on a 12-hour shift rotation. And we are probably around 22 on paper now in Burlington, sorry, as Al had left from Burlington. And rightfully, some people will say we had 19 in 1982 and now we have 22 in 2019. But we also used to do all of that work. So we would be tied up with the domestic violence, we'd be tied up with sexual assaults, we'd be tied up with things differently. And it's become more complicated, the court system and disclosure and our timelines for getting disclosure to Crowns on criminal offenses and things. So the numbers of uniformed patrol officers will never keep pace with growth. But you also have to look at the bigger picture of what other resources are behind the scenes to assist them. We definitely do need to grow, and we definitely do need to grow in Milton.
That's all I have for now. Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Best.
Yeah, similar comments as Councillor Malvo. Just regarding the Maplehurst issue, if it's possible, you could send the town and possibly the mayor's office some of the information that you just disclosed there, and if something that we can do as a council in supporting, because I know with the recent provincial decisions, they do change their mind when they have facts presented to them, and this is a classic case of downloading. And if we've had this previously when I was on the Police Services Board, when they had changed the whole court system around and they finally came to their senses and paid for the court officers. If you could do that, and also regarding traffic information, that's something I'm glad to see that we've getting this implemented. Is there any other changes that you see coming out from the province and your own department that could assist us? Because every councillor is getting these complaints.
Yeah, it's as populations grow and traffic increases, I think you will get more complaints. I mean, I see it. Doesn't matter what time of day now when I'm traveling up and down 25 Highway to come to Milton or to get up to Halton Hills and the congestion. So I think that is a reality that's going to stay with us. I think we need to leverage technology as much as we can on both photo radar and red light cameras, and still have police officers out there giving out 49 or 50,000 offense notices per year. The province, I think there is sometimes some knee-jerk reactions to someone says we need to save money, and someone in the Ministry of Corrections says here's 400,000 that we're paying to the police, let's take it back, and they don't look at the repercussions, the negative impacts to the facility and to their own correctional officers who benefit from us being there. We did, Alan, Julie, and Staff Sergeant Ellie Bale did up a very detailed report for me to share with Minister Jones, which we could certainly share with the Mayor's office tomorrow now. So we'll get those statistics to you, and we will be able to get also a copy of the letter that came from the Assistant Deputy Minister from Correctional Services announcing that this was finishing December 31st. And I think more letters are better. Maplehurst happens to be in Milton, so it makes perfect sense if there were a letter from Mayor Krantz or someone here in this municipality, because we should not be impacted, and frontline policing should not be impacted in a municipality because of a provincial jail.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you, Chief, and hopefully we can get those statistics and have that information out, because it's not only yourself, but I know with the regional paramedic service and also Milton Hospital, the emergency ward, you know, I'm the first time a visitor there, and just seeing how many residents of Maplehurst are in the emergency ward, and how many police officers have to be there as well. So it basically just goes down the line. So I appreciate any information that we can have to support you. That's all.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Cluett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief, for being here. And I guess on behalf of everybody here, if you can continue to pass along to the people in their service, thank you for doing what they do and keeping us the safest region in Canada. Councillor Best brought up the ministry's decision to make the cut. I know that it was put in, you made some comments in our local media, but I really want to stress to the community how important it is to have our officers there at Maplehurst and the Vanier Centre for Women. And I echo Councillor Best's thing. I'll be more than happy to join him in bringing that forward at this council to send a letter to the minister, and I'm sure there won't be any resistance at the regional level as well. We have to make sure that our community is as safe as possible, and I know that you being there is part of that. One of the things I wanted to bring that up. The other one, and I don't want to put you on the spot, is the town of Milton is doing a public survey on cannabis. It's now reaching that year decision where Milton had opted out for the time being to open up retail cannabis outlets, and I know that a couple of other municipalities in Halton have said yes. And I was just wondering if you had any information, any new pieces of information that you can bring to us, any impacts in the community, or if any of outlets have been opened.
Yeah, I could get back to you and to council on any specific impacts. I think generally it's been underwhelming in some ways. It's Marijuana, as Mayor Burton and the Chair of the Police Services Board and I have discussed, has been around for a long, long time. And personally, I think that the province should have decriminalized marijuana as opposed to legalizing it, because that opens a whole bunch of different doors, and not all good ones, when it comes to enforcement and when it comes to people having access. So whether there is a government store or not in any municipality, the bottom line is people are going to have access to marijuana. And in some cases, if they are buying it off the local chapter of the Hells Angels, where much of it comes from, they are not going to be as certain of what's in it. But I think there's also, the reality is that organized crime is also involved in the legal marijuana world. Where there's money to make money, they will be there, and they are there. So it's a bit of a catch-22 on where the money is going. And I think we will also see, I'm trying to think of the word, counterfeit government marijuana, where marijuana will come from different sources, and they will be able to package it and make it look like it's legitimate, which will cause us other issues, and people will be selling it in stores. I think we have never really had the illegal dispensary issue that some of our neighbors have had. I think the city of Hamilton, larger city of Hamilton, had upwards of 40 illegal dispensaries at one point. I think we've had one, maybe two, and we were able to shut those down fairly quickly. So I don't have any negative or positive statistics on what's happened since the legalization, but it's certainly one of the biggest changes to law enforcement in this past 12 months.
No, thanks, Chief. Again, I didn't want to put you on the spot asking for specific details, and I know that's probably something that we can ask for at a later time, but just wanted to, obviously, you know that Milton is now going to be sort of revisiting that decision in the next little while, so it's always
I did see a TV interview not too long ago, so I think, yeah. We will, I will look and see if there's anything of consequence either way and get back to you.
Okay. And one further question. I know that traffic is obviously on the top of everybody's mind. And I just wanted to reiterate, because members of council, I know that we all get our individual phone calls, emails and letters, and social media call-outs to improve things. And one of the things that I'd like to try to bring up is obviously the Halton Road Watch as a way for residents to communicate directly with Halton Police to identify specific instances of speeding, and if they have all that information. Can you just sort of give us I guess a 30-second elevator speech on the Halton Road Watch program and how success it's been?
Yeah, no, it has been around for a while now, and it is definitely useful, and we do have people call in. Sometimes they have more information than in other instances, and the more is better. And sometimes a well-placed warning is quite effective with someone that they may think twice, just as they do when they get a ticket, although some people get multiple tickets and don't learn from that experience either. I think the other thing that's important, and it gets back to your question on traffic as well, and having Superintendent Albano here refresh my mind to this, is a lot of times speeding can be, it could be 15 over, it can be 50 over. When someone's going 140 and a 60 in a school zone, that's obviously something different. Some of the lower level speeding, which we do enforce, does not necessarily cause the crashes that we see. And what Al often does a good job when we're talking about this in senior leadership team types of meetings is how do we target the enforcement to decrease more accidents? And certainly Al could speak to that a little bit if you would like, but I know in Burlington, they started to look, when we have analytical tools to look at where our accidents are happening and where multiple accidents are happening, and by and large, they're intersection related. So if we really want to have a positive impact on the collisions, which then cause insurance costs and health-related costs when people are injured, then we should be targeting more of the intersections and doing them on a priority basis. So we can say at any given time the top 1, 2, 3 or top 10 most dangerous intersections, if I phrase it that way, in the town of Milton, and we could target enforcement more towards that and try to have a greater impact on the accidents. Most times someone going 15 or 20 kilometers over through a neighborhood which might upset someone, we understand that. It does not often lead to that crash. So it's two different types of enforcement. One where we're just enforcing because it's legitimate, they are going too fast. And the other where we're definitely targeting and trying to make an analytical decision for where we are. Did I capture that?
Perfect, yes. Thanks, yeah. The chief captured that perfectly. And as I talked earlier in the year with all of you, is I direct my traffic units to be in the areas where we have an increase in traffic collisions, and my goal is to reduce collisions, whether they're property damage only or personal injury as well. That's the number one concern, to make our roads safer by reducing collisions. And as the chief pointed out, on a lot of our rural roads, it's upsetting to some residents about the speed, and we do get out there. And I think we do an effective job when we're out there, but I do ensure that my officers concentrate their efforts in intersections where we're having a lot of collisions. So when I look at our stats, year to date, we've had, for personal injury accidents, we've had 3 more collisions than we did all for the same period of time last year. So we're at 268 personal injury collisions as compared to 265. Now that doesn't take into account our population increase or the amount of traffic going through our roads. We don't measure that, and we're going to be looking at trying to measure that for the end of the year so I can give you a better representation of what that rate looks like. So I think we're being effective, and we'll continue to do that. Also, just about our traffic, that was with 2 officers less this year, because I had 2 officers trained specifically for commercial motor vehicle inspections. So we now have 2 officers in one district that are trained, certified in that, but that took months of courses and training with the mentor officer, and now they're out on their own, and that'll help us as well.
Thanks, Al. And I think our motor vehicle collision statistics are up 6% so far this year. But when you correct that for population growth, it's negligible. So that we're staying at about the same level as last year.
Councillor, anything further?
No, that's it. Just again, our thanks very much for this. It's been very informative.
Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thanks to the chief and the senior officers that are here. A couple of questions, I guess, and an observation or two. And of course, you've seen my hand go up right away when Chief started to mention Maplehurst. Not to regurgitate on sending a letter and all those nice things that we've heard already. I helped to take a lead role back, I'm going to guess now, probably 10 years ago, under the previous government when this became an issue. And I'm here on record to suggest that I'm prepared to do the same thing again. Never mind just the letter, but the eyeball to eyeball with either the Premier and or the appropriate minister, along with either the Chief Chairman of the Police Services Board and or the Regional Chair. And that's what happened before, and I think it may be wise for the Chief and others to think about that sooner than later. It was very effective then, and I suspect hopefully it would be effective now. And of course, most everybody around this table knows, and the Chief as well, that I'm pretty well a bottom line guy. And it just doesn't affect the town of Milton because Maplehurst here. It affects the whole police services community there with that downloading. And of course, I'm very familiar with downloading when it comes to the province, not only in this one particular area. Chief alluded to some of it earlier on. So if that needs to be addressed too, we can do that. But I'm talking about just Maplehurst now on doing that. And so the Chief can, respond to that. I only suspect that he might be supportive of that, but he might want to talk to the Regional Chair and or Chairman of the Police Services Board and get a bit of a game plan as to what can be done in that regard to not only maybe keep that 400,000 that was alluded to, but maybe up it a bit. I don't know if that's possible or not. So the Chief might want to respond to that. But one other thing, Mr. Chairman, again, I have no issues with photo radar or red light cameras and that, but there's a perception out there, and I get it frequently, as an example with parking tickets in the town of Milton. It's suggested to me quite frequently the only reason why we do it is to raise more money. And I don't like that perception that the only reason that we are doing it, police included, that it's only for money. It's not that. So I guess how do we get around that perception? We're doing it for safety, and I think mention was made of that before, but I suspect my colleagues get it from time to time. I know I get it often, more particularly in the area of parking tickets that we have our own by law enforcement here. But I get it from time to time with mention if you're going 100 in a school zone, then you darn well deserve it. But again, mention was made if you're going 110 in 100, little discretion comes into play there. But I know the law is the law. 100 means 100, not 110. It's called common sense. So how do we deal with that? Last but certainly not least, Mr. Chairman, I know that there's upping of speed limits in certain, provincial highways. Should that happen at the regional and or local levels? Quite often we've had to deal with that where people want it reduced, only for us at both levels to up it again. So we come under criticism both ways. So there's three questions there, Chief, that you and your senior officers might help the community and us address those concerns that we have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yes, yes, and yes. So, but the first one, certainly any support from your office and from Milton Council when it comes to the Maplehurst issue, I think would be timely. I would like us to also, as police service, put together more of a fulsome, here's what we actually cost at Maplehurst. If we're asking you to still give us $400,000 and we're spending over $1 million a year, maybe we should be asking for more at the same time. So there are only, just to put that in perspective, I think there are 21 provincial jail facilities across Ontario. Only 4 of them are mega jails, and Maplehurst is one. There's one in Kawartha Lakes, and one in Toronto, and one in Penetang, which is OPP policed, but the same impact. So when the ministry talks about treating all jails and police services the same, it's not the same, because there's only 4 places that have 1,500 plus inmates. So thank you very much for that. I think when it comes to photo radar and red light cameras, if a municipality is looking at doing that, and in red light cameras we already are, I think your focus should and is rightfully on safety. So we're not here for the fines which flow through the POA court and to the region, and some might trickle back. We're here because you, the citizens, are telling us traffic is your #1 concern, and this is the most effective and efficient way for us to do more traffic enforcement. It's often the people who complain about speeding on their street that get caught for speeding, and then they say, well, not me. So it's sort of the same thing when they go through a red light or they're caught on photo radar. And I think part of the issue with photo radar back when it was tried provincially is it was set very low, and I think rightfully people could say that was a cash grab. And I think if the speed limit was 100 and it was set at 105, I think that's unfair. I believe the OPP on our major, or on the 401 and the 407 specifically, probably don't stop hardly anyone less than 130. So 30 over, and then they will stop people. And I think they probably still stop enough. So I would, on the 400 highways, I would support a speed limit of 120. I think vehicles are much different than they were 30 or 40 years ago in a lot of ways for safety. But on some of our local residential streets, that would be a much different issue, I think.
Anything further? Thank you. My next speaker is Councillor Tesser-Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Chief, for your report. I found all that really interesting. At the risk of extending our discussion indefinitely with a really big issue, you did mention earlier on about PTSD. I fully recognize that it extends beyond the scope of a regional or local and even maybe a provincial issue, but I would like to know what kind of an impact, if you can somehow put a number to it or a range, what kind of impact does the effects of PTSD have on your bottom line as far as your budget paying for officers who are not working?
Well, it's hard to, because sometimes some WSIB and some human resource issues are pretty sensitive, and in some instances, and we manage some through the region of Halton, we might not even know the actual diagnosis, and sometimes that's not a bad thing. But I would hazard to guess that we probably at any time would have 15 to 20. Not all PTSD, there's a variety of stress. and a variety of mental health issues which are prevalent in society, so it's reasonable to assume they're going to be just as prevalent in emergency, frontline emergency workers, if not more, because of what they deal with. So 20, if it was 20 police officers off, unable to work, and had to be backfilled or filled at some point because we'd be paying salaries twice, it would be 20 people would be $2 million. 10 people would be $1 million, give or take. It's a little more than that with benefits and things. So it is a substantial impact. And when you look at if a platoon now of a staff sergeant, 2 sergeants, and 21 constables is 19 constables because 2 are off for whatever, mental health or health reason, and all the other absences and vacation and maternity leaves and health-related WSIB injuries, it can have a substantial impact on the number of officers who are actually able to come to work or available to work on that 24-hour basis particularly. So it is substantial.
Thank you. I believe anyhow recently that the Chief Coroner of Ontario initiated a review panel to look at, unfortunately, suicides that are occurring among the police service members. Do you see anything, and I haven't had a chance to read the report, but do you see anything positive coming down by way of policy changes, whether it's through different hiring practices or initial training practices to reduce the number of officers who have trouble dealing with the PTSD?
Yes, and I think the other thing that we were just talking to the deputies and I today, we have to remember too, is PTSD is not in and of itself incurable or fatal, right? So while someone may have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, they can come back from that. It may take a year or 2 years, or they come back to a different type of position. Some people can't or choose not to, and that's okay too. But there are ongoing costs to those. As I said, there is a number of different mental health types of situations where people are off, which is not PTSD, which have similar impacts because an absence is an absence. On the PTSD side, we do a lot more when we're hiring on not just the onboarding and the initial training and some of what's taught at the Ontario Police College. We also have, we're going to be putting another full day for all 1,000 employees, uniform and civilian, in the spring of next year on mental health and mental readiness. We've done some of that before. We've had a consultant come in and train all of our staff when all of our frontline members go through what's called block training. So they'll come in for 2 to 4 days. And there was a good segment of that dedicated to mental health. And just for council's knowledge, we also have not only our employee assistance types of programs, and some will run through the Homewood in Guelph or other professional organizations. We also have our own in-house organizational wellness unit where there is a staff sergeant and a constable full-time who help people manage a variety of issues that they may be going through, and have access to a psychologist who is not on staff but on contract with us. And we've been having some very good success with that particular doctor. So there are a lot of resources. As you alluded to, thankfully not here specifically, have we had on-duty suicide? We did, I guess, in around 1979. There was a young officer who shot and killed himself after his fiancée had passed away. But just last week, when we were on our way to the National Police Memorial in Ottawa, I think it was on the Friday night, there was a suicide of an officer in Ottawa and a suicide of an officer in Toronto. So it certainly does happen, and we're alive to it. And there are also a lot of stresses outside of policing, which the same police officer who may have PTSD may also have a variety of other stressful things going on in his or her life as well. So Dr. Dirk Heyer is now the Chief Coroner, and he's a fabulous individual, and I'm glad he is our Chief Coroner. He used to work with us on child abuse cases when he was at Sick Children's Hospital in Toronto, so he's been around policing for a long time. I have not read the whole detailed report yet, just some of the overview in the media, so I have to read it to make sure it's true, but it should be something that helps to push the needle a little bit.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your candid answer. I think it's an important issue that we have to really discuss in depth now. I mean, for many, many years, I think it was stigmatized, not just among police service members, but society in general. So I appreciate your sensitive approach to it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Ali is the last person I have on the list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief, for coming in today. I really want to thank you for taking the time out, driving into this busy town that keeps growing and never stops growing. I also wanted to especially thank Halton Police for collaborating with town staff in bringing about the road safety campaign, the slow down campaign. That was a great experience for me working with the Halton Police. They were so helpful and appreciative and willing to work whichever way was possible to make it happen. So I want to thank you for that. And also for the recent school safety zone campaign that we did with Halton Police. That was great as well. I saw a significant decrease in complaints from residents as a result of that. So I just wanted to point that out. And I also want to appreciate you specifically asking for photo radars, because I represent a ward, Councillor Hamid and I both represent a ward, which is the fastest growing ward in the fastest growing town. And traffic continues to be a huge issue for us day in, day out. And I think photo radars will certainly help a lot. And even if it's a service level increase at the local level, regional level, provincial, whatever level, it is a necessity now, the way we are growing. And as His Worship was mentioning about how people think that it's a cash grab, people will think anything. People think we make millions of dollars here sitting on council, where the reality is very far from that. So it's our job to actually educate people and let them know, you know, this is not true, this is the truth. So thank you for that, and I look forward actually to seeing more photo radars in town. Thank you.
The other thing, just to add to the people who may say that it's a cash grab and it's not, it's for safety, is the tickets generally from a red light camera or from a photo radar are less than what the tickets would be if a police officer gave them out, and they don't have points on their license because the driver has not been identified. So if you're going to get a red light camera ticket or a speeding ticket, you're better to get it the photo kind, for those two reasons as well, if you want to use those. And I think it definitely would make roads safer.
Anything further, Councillor Ali? I have no other speakers, so I just, on behalf of the corporation, want to thank you for coming out to speak to us this evening. I think you do come on an annual basis. Your predecessor did, and that's much appreciated. And I also want to, on behalf of council, also thank your team for inviting us to the detachment last February, I believe. And if you happen to do that again on an occasional basis, that would be appreciated. Do you have any final comments you wish to make?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for what you do both on this council and on regional council, and we'll see some of you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. I have a motion of receipt moved by Councillor Best, seconded by Councillor Ali. Be it resolved that the Halton Regional Police Service presentation be received for information. Any further questions? All in favor? It's carried. At this time, Regional Council update.
Chairman, I have nothing.
Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Best.
Three quick items for those councillors that haven't registered yet. We do have a tour of facilities on Wednesday, but of facilities of the region. One thing that is coming up on October 16th is a regional council meeting where we have a number of public meetings scheduled for the Milton area, such as the Steeles Avenue and Highway 25 environmental assessment. I invite all councillors to. And also my last AMO board meeting, the Minister Clark confirmed that he received the regional review 2 weeks ago, and he will be coming back. Though he did confirm with us that he's taking his time on this because he wants to get this right. So it may not be mid-November, it could be the end of November, so stay tuned.
Any other member of council wishes to speak? Any other items of business? If none, then we're adjourned. Good evening.